Welcome to Grow with Purpose. This is the Axiom podcast where we talk with real business owners and real families about family business and subject matter experts. And we've got all three of those rolled into one today. So in the studio, and I'll preface this with saying none of us knew we were going to be sitting here for like 72 hours ago.
Right.
So this has happened
Right.
serendipitously, and so we jumped on the opportunity. We're here with Alan and Nick Irving of Irving Financial. So I could do the intro based on what I know about Alan from spending a lot of time with him in C12, but why don't I turn the mic over to you guys and just give us a little bit of what you do and what your business looks like.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll start. You can add whatever you want. So we have a firm, Irving Financial Group, that is had for about 23 years. So I started that after we moved to Florida. Wanted to be in the wealth management business and liked the idea of the comprehensive team approach with CPAs and attorneys to help clients make good decisions. So, so we've always approached it from that direction. So started the firm and have built it over the years to where we do comprehensive financial planning and wealth management, and then have the last few years been able to bring Nicholas in. Nick is my oldest son, and so he's been able to come in as an advisor as well. So we have a team of 5, and Nick helps me on the advisory team. And I'll let you add anything you want to it from there.
Yeah, so I came on board actually about 2 years ago, pretty much right on. So I started my career in the car business, and I enjoyed it, but I hadn't really even considered family business, not because it was kept, but I didn't think about it. And then Dad and I started to talk about it, and I realized that I had a lot of interest. And so I've kind of gotten the opportunity to come on board, get up to speed, and I've enjoyed it. It's been great to work with Dad, and it's a wonderful field, and we love our clients.
So it's interesting, you're referring to him as Dad.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I would have never guessed this because I worked with my dad right out of college, and same thing, called him Dad. And then I started working with other businesses and clients, and I would hear, like you would say, Alan. And I'm like, that sounds weird because I know Alan is Nick's dad. Yeah, so I broached that conversation with one of them one time and said, well, she said, well, my mother and I just set up boundaries. And it was one way. It was kind of a subtle reminder that we have these boundaries between work and business, and at business, it's Barbara. At home, it's Mom.
Right.
And so it was. I've always found that interesting. So, apparently you guys have no boundaries between work and business. You talk about business all the time.
Exactly.
So, you've been in the wealth management space for 23 years.
That's
you
correct.
said.
Yeah.
And so you are. You're obviously 44 years old.
Of
started,
course, right. I like that. Yes.
So I gather there was something before that. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So my wife and I both grew up in northern Maine, and our family had a farming operation, but my father had several different companies. He was an entrepreneur, and he had a potato sales office. That is what he did. That was his daily work where he went. But he had several other companies in which he had ownership and partnership in. And so I grew up in that environment of seeing, the entrepreneurial efforts and benefits and costs, right, of all of that. And so from a young age, I always had interest in that. So after I finished college, I came back and I partnered with Dad on 2 businesses. So one was a potato farm in northern Maine. The other was a potato packaging company. So we'd buy other growers' produce as well, package it and ship it to what you buy, your 5 and 10 pound bags of potatoes in the store. So that's what I did for 7 years, and I loved it. We expanded both businesses while I was there, and then my wife and I started to have children and realized why people don't do those 2 businesses specifically, right? So the farming operation is very busy in the summer. The packing operation is very busy in the winter. So it just became apparent that I would never make a ball game. And those are things you don't think of before you have children. So great industry. Really loved it. Loved the people involved in that industry. But that was my start before coming into this business.
So you make the transition from Maine to Florida, stayed on the East Coast, but that's about all you did.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a long ways down.
Right.
And And why wealth management? Why financial planning?
Well, when I was partnered with Dad, I have 4 sisters, but I was the only one. I was the only son, and I was the only one involved in the business with him. So, as we partnered on those businesses, he was also redoing his estate planning. He and Mom were working on that. So I was involved as a partner, and I was involved as the executor. So I was just a third party to what was happening professionally. And that's when I saw him working with he had a great attorney, he had a great accountant, and what I found, or what we found through that process, he had a great financial advisor as well. And what we found through that process is that all of those advisors knew a good portion of Mom and Dad's estate, but they didn't really have it all. So all three were giving advice with the information they knew. And so sometimes that might be the advisor saying, I think you should do this. And Dad would then talk to his CPA, and he'd be like, oh, no, don't do this. Don't do that because of these taxable consequences. You should do this. Then he'd talk to his attorney. So there's a lot of, it made it difficult to make decisions without getting everybody on the same page. And so, and they did work together some, but I just realized the importance of having full transparency with your advisory team. So that's when I really said, you know what, if we ever stop farming, that's what I want to do. I want to figure out how to work collectively, and I want to be the advisor in that.
It's interesting. I've run into one other individual who had a career, and then he was a career naval officer, and was basically retiring with a pension. He didn't have to work, didn't have to do anything. But I met him probably 25 years ago. And he was just starting, I think, with Morgan Stanley at the time. And he was going to learn this whole new career. And I said, why? Why would you sign up? Because, starting a new career, you know this, Nick, you're in the middle of it right now, right? The first 18 to 36 months is brutal, and then the next 60 months after that is a slog, and then maybe you get to year 8, 9, 10, and you're like, okay, now I don't have as many regrets on as many days as I used to. But right. I was asking him, like, why? And he gave a similar answer of having had a personal experience, recognizing that in himself some of the gifts and abilities he had, and he's a super organized, great planner, but also very good at getting to the emotional side of what people want versus the tangible side of what they actually need.
Sure.
Right. And so he said, I felt like this is an area I can make a difference with the rest of my life. And he's been doing it for 25 years.
Right.
And so I've only heard that story twice. I got to pick,
right,
and I picked financial. I'm sure it exists in other places.
Sure.
But it's not the normal mode of entry into the profession. So you guys do financial planning, which we don't have many of those in this area. Right?
Yeah, very rare. Yeah.
So what is it about Irving Financial that is a little bit different or stands out in your mind, the reason that you went into this space? And you probably touched on a little bit, but just explicitly, how would you describe your shop and how you guys do things compared to some of the other ways to do it?
There's a few things that of where we started and then where we are, right? So that has transformed over time a little bit. And I think that one of the biggest things in starting was always that I think I have just always viewed money as a tool versus a trophy. And it's difficult in the financial, anytime you're striving for success, it's easy to have that metric of money, right? Then start to just take over and you lose what you're really trying to do. But when you continue to bring it back to the fact that it's a tool, then it just helps you make better decisions. What am I trying to do with this tool? And our motivation has always been with families. Again, from a farming background, in those areas geographically where there's a lot of farming, there's a lot of multi-generational farms. So I've always connected to that as well. I've connected to the benefits and struggles of working with family because it cuts both ways. And I've seen people do it very, very well. And unfortunately, I've seen some people really struggle or have some real hardship with it. So from the beginning, it was always how do we help people grow wealth instead of just become rich, and have a focus on that. So building wealth has been a focus all along. I would say when we bring it to current day, then what's changing for us now is that I have a large family, and I didn't know if any would join the business. But now that Nicholas has joined, and I think we may have others over the years who will join, what we're really saying to people when you say, well, what's different with Irving Financial Group, is that we are looking at it being our family serving your family for generations. And so we're really trying to take the things that our clients have shared with us that is important to them, which this year we learned through an advisory board that the values of how we built the firm and how we serve them are more important to them than the things I was thinking was important, which was our processes and the way that we do things. They very clearly shared with us, no, it's the values. We want to make sure those values stay in the company throughout the time. And that's when we realized how important that the multi-generational view for our clients was.
So I stayed off this topic as long as I could. You may know where this is going.
I teed it up. So, right, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you teed it up. So you said, that this is now a family business.
Right.
And, there's a likelihood now that there's going to be other family members that join the business. What the audience doesn't know is that that's pretty high likelihood. Given
higher than average, for
higher
sure.
Than average,
You just look at the numbers.
Yeah, so I won't pose this question to Alan because he probably gets it a lot. But Nick, how many siblings do you have?
I have 15 younger siblings.
So
So there's 16 of us total.
So 16.
Yep.
Which is, we could have a whole other podcast. As Alan knows, we could have a whole other C12 day sometimes just talking about the insights we learned from the Irvings. But so maybe segue for a second and say, given your experience with Nick and having him come into the business now, and you've been in the business for a couple of years, what does the path look like? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm curious, is there a path, or is it explicit, articulated? Is it, kind of, there's a mental framework around it? Because I think that's a lot of things that's where a lot of families get into trouble,
right?
Where there's more of an assumption than a pathway. Have you guys thought through that?
That's a great observation.
Yeah, we're learning, right? So what we are doing now is different than what we did when Nick was 15. So with our 15-year-old now, 16-year-old now, we're trying to find the manner in which to encourage the family that there is a path here. It's not for everybody, so you have to have something to offer, right? So we're not just a family employer. That's not what we are. We're building something very specific as a firm, and there's roles within that if family has the strengths to do that, we would love to see, and has the interest, and we'd love to see them do that. And I think that the thing that I learned from the farming community is that we would see children come into the farm because it was an expectation, right? Or we'd see fathers and mothers allowing kids to come in the farm because there was an expectation the opposite way, right?
Well, let's be honest. A lot of times the first motivation is free, cheap labor.
And of course it is. Yeah. So you get that as long
There's
as you
an
can.
expectation that you're not going to take a paycheck.
Exactly. So having a large family, the thing that we left behind with farming was we couldn't use them as free, cheap labor.
Don't worry, there was still some of
in the farm, but it's a little bit harder once you in the financial services.
Once you get regulated.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was really so with Nick, the conversation that he and I had is he was doing very well in the car business, and I just said, hey, you're doing great, and you don't need this, but if you ever want to talk about the family business, let me know. So when you said, was there a path? No, that was a conversation, but he said, no, absolutely. I actually have a lot of interest. So we took a year and involved my dad. I have a lot of respect for my dad and have learned a lot from him. And I just said, hey, are you willing to meet with us monthly? And we'll just talk about, well, what that could look like, what he has to bring to the table, how we can do that. And the three of us just took a year to plan it. And so it really made a nice entry.
So give me like 2 or 3 of the topics when you came together to talk with your dad and your grandfather. What were some of the things you guys talked about?
Yeah, well, here I'll cover what for me was the most important one. I think was
compensation.
That was what I was going to say. That's why I said I'll see what he has to say.
An adjustment of expectations and just a clearness of what I could expect from the experience and what he would expect. Which I think we have a tendency in our family, which is I think a blessing, but we are over communicators in the sense that we lay the whole deal out, and we just cover the whole topic. And
Well, if 16 people get a
I
say,
know.
I'm afraid there's
It's a
probably
real
no
need.
stone unturned.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing and it's a real need, but by doing that, you can kind of erase a lot of questions and head off a lot of conflict points by just clearly laying out, hey, this may be like the ABCs, very clear, but at the same time, we're going to lay it out anyway so that everybody's on the same page. For me, that was really helpful. And we covered other things as well, but I'd say that was probably the most important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we covered compensation because that can be a real sticking point. Not only starting compensation, but the expectation of what that what that might look like over time, and what it takes to move that, right? And the fact that in any business you have to earn your way, and so in a family business you just want to make sure, or we're trying to protect against an expectation of even financial performance just because I'm a family member. So how do we tie some metrics to that?
Yeah, I went to work for my dad, and that's a conversation I didn't have.
Oh, really?
But it was the most uncomfortable conversations I had to have when I had to go back to him and be like, hey, this ain't enough.
Right,
I mean,
right.
And he honest, it wasn't out of any ill will. He
Yeah.
just kind of said, well, what do you need?
Right.
And I gave him a number, and he's like, fine.
Yeah.
It's like, man, I could have done that 6 months ago.
Should have done that earlier. Well, one of the things that was very revealing to me is I was, you tend to think about things at certain times in your life. So I remembered what engineers made when I graduated college. I remembered what because that's just a time that everybody's looking for jobs and you know what they're making.
Right.
And so I literally went back and I said, okay, what has inflation done since I graduated college to now? And it literally doubled, right? So I said everything that I thought was enough for somebody starting out based upon my 30-year-old expectation has doubled. And so I have to get realistic about that.
Yeah, and now in the last 5 years, it's doubled.
And double again.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, when we talk about families and money, it's kind of a taboo subject. I've heard lots of perspectives on this. Lots of, not want to say perspectives, but stories where everything from we never knew what our parents had until we were named personal representative. Right. And like, whoa. And then now there's kind of resentment of like, now I've got this burden of responsibility that I wasn't prepared for. And maybe at another point on the spectrum is I grew up kind of ashamed that we were wealthy. And money was a thing that our family didn't have healthy conversations about. And I love the viewpoint of it's just a tool.
Right.
I think that's probably the healthiest way of all to view it. I'm sure that's why you go that route. But what are some of the conversations that families aren't having about money that they should? And I don't want to limit, like normally when I hear this question asked, it's like they're asking it to somebody who was like the third employee at Google.
Right.
And now you've got more money than they know what to do with. They've started 3 foundations. Like, what kind of conversation should we have? I'm like, what kind of conversation should I be having with my kids?
Right.
Because I'm not in that group. But
Right.
What's your take on the top 2 or 3 conversations about money that families ought to be having, irrespective of what their net worth is?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame the question because I think that the principles are the same. Whether you have very little money, or you have a lot of money. We do an annual family meeting, which we just had on Saturday, so this is fresh for me.
Awesome.
But part of what we tried to communicate was that the transfer, if we can successfully transfer the values that we think are important, and we follow biblical values, and so we believe that those values are the most important thing, and if those values happen to be accompanied with wealth, then we believe that the wealth can be sustainable and can be a blessing. And however, if we transfer wealth and not values, then I think it's more likely to be a curse. So when we work with families and encourage families, it's really to be transparent about motivations behind what you're doing, why the tool matters. Like again, if we're going to call money a tool, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to we're trying to provide for the family. We're trying to provide some opportunities, doing some charitable things. But even if we're doing charitable things, why? There's questions to be answered there, and so it's just some of the. I've been learning a lot in this past year, just as I'm kind of in the stage of my life where I'm saying, okay, how do we work with adult children? How do we train them and encourage them on things that it took us 20 or 30 years to learn. And so my whole perspective on inheritance is changing, and that's been very informative to how we view things personally. But we're also finding with our clients that our clients tend to think a lot of the same way that we do, in the sense of they have the same worldview, and we're getting the same leaning in to that conversation, saying, well, what do you mean by that, and how would I apply that in my family? And so that's been really interesting. So I don't know that I answered your question well, but just being early, you don't have to disclose everything, but your family generally has a sense as to whether you have some degree of wealth or not, and helping them to learn things along the way with why you're doing what you're doing. So again, it's not just trying to get rich, it's building wealth. And so why does it matter that you build wealth? Why does it matter that you die and still have more than $1 left? Like, what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah. It's funny you say that families generally have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I experienced this after my boys both got high school jobs, you know, and they're working, you know, after school, trying to squeeze in studies, you know, and they get a paycheck. And, you know, they're happy to have the money.
Right.
But now they have a whole different appreciation for what, you know, $15 an hour gets you.
Right.
Yep.
And they knew our lifestyle, right? They knew how we lived.
Right.
Yep.
But I don't think they appreciated what it took to live that lifestyle.
Of course.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then I remember we went to Universal Studios for there's a 10-year gap between my oldest and my youngest. So she'd never been to Universal. They'd gone a bunch of times back in the day. And so we went for her birthday. I remember sitting at a restaurant where we had gotten, you know, like 5 burgers, 5 fries, and 5 soft drinks. And one of the boys saw the bill, and it was like $130 or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
And they were like, wow, Dad, thanks. I really appreciate it. It was the most gratifying moment for
That's
me as a
awesome.
dad.
Right,
Because
right,
do you know how
right.
many of those $130 checks I paid?
Yeah, he's never seen.
I
Right?
got
know.
nothing. Yeah, I got no acknowledgement. So
Perspective is a beautiful thing.
yeah. So
Yeah.
Nick, you're you know, you're not as old and wizened as your father and I are. So we have the perspective of a different generation.
Yeah.
From your side, what does your generation need to be hearing about money and wealth in the family context that is being ignored or not talked about?
That's a great question. I think if I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be that it's not a race. There's a big rush for people my age. It's driven by social media. Just that, you know, if you haven't made it by XYZ age, then it's too late for you. Or, you know, if you do this thing, then, you know, in a year you'll be making insert number here amount per month or whatever. And, you know, the difference between, and Dad touched on this a little bit, but between getting rich and building wealth is meaningful. Wealth is a stored opportunity for future things, and it's characterized by very little debt and assets of some kind. Rich is not necessarily the same thing. And there's this push in young people to pursue riches because it's flashier, but it's not the same thing as wealth, and it provides much less opportunity. And a lot of times it feels more like slavery than a real opportunity. So I guess I would just say the number one thing people need to hear at my age is just to recognize your life's not over at 30 or 35 or 40 or whatever number. You have years left, and you know, you continue to learn and develop along the way, and that's okay. It's kind of the way it's supposed to go, and it's good for you.
It's interesting. I think when I was kind of coming into my working career, 90s, you know, late 80s, doing odd jobs and stuff in high school, and then 90s getting into the professional world. The thing that my generation inherited, I think, was just work ethic. Put your head down in the pursuit of riches. You know, it was a very materialistic type of culture. And what's interesting is if you did that long enough and you learned a little bit of nuggets of wisdom, you know, about saving, about being like Dave Ramsey kind of made his mark during that period by establishing one of the points that you made, which is debt robs you of a lot of, you know, he says your income is your most important asset, and debt just puts that at risk. And so, you know, you learn a little bit of those things, and now that work ethic really makes wealth creation possible.
Right.
And in your generation, I see a striving for opportunity, not riches. And so I think your generation is probably better poised to appreciate that point you just made, that wealth is the thing that gives you opportunity. So
Right.
you want opportunity.
Right.
Wealth is a vehicle to that.
Yeah.
Now the question is, well, what do you have to do to be able to have those opportunities through wealth
Right.
accumulation? And, it's work ethic, but it's also staying away from debt. So in a lot of ways, the story hasn't changed.
Yeah.
But I think that your generation is better poised to appreciate, we just lost your camera. Your generation is better poised to appreciate that. So
Yeah.
let me pause here. We've talked about wealth, we've talked about riches, we've talked about some of the conversations that families should be having that maybe they can push. I want to go back to something you said, Alan, because it stood out to me. You did a presentation for our C12 group. People have listened to this podcast, they've heard me talk about C12 a lot. We actually did a whole episode on it. So
Oh,
I'll
really?
link to it in the show notes. Doug Pohl was in here and he talked to us about C12. But in your C12 report, there's a part of the report where we as business owners are expected to put our business vision, our values for our business, our mission statement, and you did one better. You had a slide before that talked about your family values. So if I could put you on the spot for a second to talk about your family values, because you made a point of you can't really talk about using money, I'll paraphrase, using money as a tool if you can't talk about it, using it as a tool in service of the values that the family wants to establish and live out.
Right.
So give us some insight into what are the Irving family values.
Well, this is fresh because, like I said, we just went over this with our kids too, so that's
Perfect.
helpful.
Well, you and my mom will hear about this, and
There you go.
If it doesn't turn out so well, it's probably not.
It's okay. Exactly. So yeah, no, we are concluding. Nicole and I spent a lot of time just talking about our family and what we're doing and so forth, and our family values have really boiled down to discipleship, which has always been part of how we train up our kids. It's just that's what you're doing as you're walking along life with them. But as we start to have adult children, and now we have son-in-laws and daughter-in-laws, we're seeing that our parenting is in no way nearly over. This is a job for life, and we're glad to embrace that, but we're also recognizing the responsibility that goes with that. So discipleship is one of the core values, and the other is multiplication. And so how that looks like in our family, and it relates to our business as well, but how that looks like in our family is that, again, when we look at money as a tool and not a trophy, we still have a value to multiply it. So the Bible has a parable of the stewards, of the good steward, and that particular parable doesn't have anything to do with generosity or charity or anything. It just has to do with multiplication. And so we think multiplication is important. So we look at that in our family as a multiplication of the values that we think are important, which are the values of the Bible. And then we also say, however, there's also, if the Lord is allowing us to have influence over wealth in our own family and even in our business, then we have a responsibility to work to multiply that as well. So when we look at money, and to Nick's point, that we're learning. When I was 25, I was in a hurry, and my wife might say I'm still in a hurry, but I was in a hurry. Everybody might say I'm still in a hurry, for sure. So, but I'm learning, and I'm recognizing that that is much more important, that the choices that we make in training our children on everything, but money included, have a 40 and 50 and 80 year look. Like we are now asking ourselves a question: what are the things that we can do that create, as far as training and discipleship and multiplication in our children's generation, that gives the highest probability that our grandchildren will live in the world that we want them to live in? And there's so much that we don't control, and we understand that.
Yeah.
But still, what can we put into motion today that gives that the most opportunity? So I guess that's how I'd sum it up.
It's interesting. I'm going to kind of put you on the spot too. Something else you said last week in that meeting made a big impression on me. And I'll tease it by saying I've run into quite a few wealthy people. And they do very well for the nieces, the nephews, the grandkids. Establish college funds, trust funds, buy first houses, wonderful things.
Right.
And those kids revere their grandparents, and they, in some cases, at the cost of their view of their own parents.
Right.
And you, Alan, you said something last week in the meeting we were in where you said something to the effect of, my goal is for my grandchildren to revere their parents,
Right.
or to really look up to,
Right.
and see their parents as not me.
Right.
And so it kind of speaks to a servant leadership mindset of giving Nick and his siblings everything that they need in terms of training and ability and discipleship, so that they can pass that on, and then they can get the credit for it. Like,
Right.
that's kind of what we, in business, we would say, well, that's good leadership. I want my people to get the credit for the job they're doing, not for people to look over them and give me all the accolades just because I own this stock.
Right.
So talk about that for a second. And has that been the way you've always seen it, or has that been developing, as the grandkids multiply and the weddings keep coming?
Yeah, that's a new development, and that came out of just out of some evaluation of my own goals, of what they have been and so forth, and my goals, which I don't think are particularly different than most people's goals, have been, I want it, for me to feel like I've been successful, and to get an attaboy, at my death, and my kids being like, oh, that's pretty good, right? Then I had a net worth goal, like if I could give each of my children X amount of dollars, then I would say, in addition to feeding them, which was goal 1, right? So,
far exceeded the cumulative
exactly.
Net worth.
Keep in mind,
I
10
said-
boys and 6 girls. So that's a lot. That's more food than
a lot
even
of teenage mouths.
I essentially said, if y'all get $1, I feel I've
Yeah.
been pretty good. But no,
Yeah.
so I kind of had that, and as I evaluated that, tried to evaluate that honestly, I said that's not generous. That's selfish. Like I want to be well revered, right? So I'm trying to build up these things while I'm living, so that when I'm dead, they think well of me, right? And that wasn't conscious, but that was just subconsciously what I think was happening. So no, this has been relatively new. And so as I process that more, and as we now have adult children, so we can and we have grandchildren, so we can start to see, well, how could we really make a meaningful impact? That's when it really became apparent to me that, and Nicole and I both, to say, I think our focus needs to be on our children, because it's easy to want to focus on your grandchildren. I'm not knocking that. A lot of people do amazing, wonderful things for their family, but just for us, it's easy to focus on your grandchildren because it's easy to be a hero in their eyes. And with your children, even your adult children, right? Not only do they not want to listen to you when they're teens, but they may not want to listen or follow you when they're adults, right? So a lot of times you're not a hero in their eyes. They're thinking you have old thinking, or they know better, or what have you. So there's a lot of patience that I think is going to be required in that for years and years. But if we are patient, and if we're kind, and if we're generous, and if we truly are trying to build them, our job is to make them stronger. That's what I feel very clearly is my calling right now in life, that I'm to make people stronger. Then if I make them stronger, they will make their grandchildren stronger. And if I think what I expressed to Nicholas when this thought first came to mind, maybe 6 months ago, I said, if I die and your kids are talking about me, I did something wrong, right? So, and I said, if you die and your grandkids are talking about you, you did something wrong. So this needs to keep being pushed down. We need to build this next generation to the degree we can, and to the degree that they're willing to, so that they can be the hero, because they're the ones that the kids are going to follow. So once I'm gone, who's going to actually mentor that child into being the dad that passes it on again? So to me, it seems like there's something really important in that one generation to the next versus skipping generations.
Yeah. I want to switch gears. I could keep talking about, I would love to hear how that's unrolling in the adult relationships. We'll save that for another time.
Sure,
right?
sure.
But let's switch gears and talk about, in the professional world you work in, like a lot of times the end goal is retirement.
Right.
Or it's, or it's a lot of times in the world that we work in and that you work in, that has to be preceded by exiting a business, selling it for a bunch of money. Now I've got the liquid assets to retire. I'm going to hand them to the Irvings, and they're going to make sure that I can take all the trips with all the grandkids or
Right.
whatever I want to do. And I believe your view is a little bit different. And I have a hard time sometimes, to Josie's chagrin, of embracing the idea of retirement. I don't think
Right.
it's biblical. I don't
Right.
see it anywhere, right? And so I love what I do, but I know the flavor of that has definitely changed over the years, go
Right.
through seasons. So I have to assure her that what I'll be doing 20 years from now will be work, but it's not going to look like the work that I'm doing now.
Right.
But that is somewhat countercultural. And I even say those things and kind of couch those terms and say, that's my view now. When I'm 80, I'm not going to, I'm usually talking to somebody who's 80. And like, I may be in a whole different place.
Right.
I might be much more aligned to your line of thinking then than I am now.
Sure.
But I do think there's a significant kind of countercultural direction that you seem to be moving that's kind of in line with that. And as somebody that is your space to talk about, there's a finish line.
Right.
Where's the finish line that you desire for Irving Financial clients? What are the truths that you want to help kind of evangelize in the area of what is the end game here? What are we doing this for?
Right. Right. Well, and even that's been, as you said, it's a moving target. As you learn more, you adjust your thinking and so forth. And so we have always been helping clients toward a what we call a work optional lifestyle. So a lot of our clients, like you, aren't saying, hey, I just want to check out a life. I like my work or whatever the thing might be. However, who knows what life's going to bring? If I'm disabled or we have a family emergency or like, I'd like to not be that if I'm not working, we're in dire straits. So how do we get financially independent enough that it's a work optional lifestyle? So we've been working on that for 23 years, and that's our specialty. That's what we do, and we've been very good at that. Our clients have been amazing. However, what's really interesting now, being 23 years deep into it, is that the clients that were 50 when I started, are now 73, and the clients that were 60 are now 83. So we've seen this whole trend, how that's all worked out for them, what their life has looked like. And we've been able to see clients that travel and leisure and so forth and have enjoyed that. We've seen clients invest in family. We've seen clients do all kinds of different things. But I think that what's been interesting is we've seen some clients that have actually retired and they're enjoying their retirement, but they lack purpose. They've expressed it, that they lack purpose. And so that has caused me to, as I'm approaching that stage now, I'm 53 and I'm saying, I plan to be working for a long time because I enjoy my work and it's work that I can do for a long time. But at the same time, then what's the purpose to keep building wealth, right? That's one question. Because some people, I think, feel like, well, it's wrong. I have more than I need, and now it's just selfish or greedy to keep trying to build wealth. So what's the purpose to keep building wealth? And what could I do with that tool if I actually had giftings in that? So we have, and I talked a little bit about this in C12, we have this messaging of Beyond the Summit. Like, it occurred to me that I've been helping people view the summit of retirement. And that's what people come to us for, when can we make it? When can we not be asking the question, do we have enough anymore?
Right.
And so that's been the summit we've been working on with our clients for years. And what has occurred to me is that at the stage that people are retiring, they have more wisdom, more discretionary time, and more resources and expertise than they've ever had. And now they're checking out, right? And I don't even mean that as I don't mean checking out in a negative way, but they're withdrawing all those things from the field, and they're saying, I'll do some charitable stuff, and I'll do leisure or whatever other things there might be, and I think that for people who are saying maybe that's not for me, my goodness, like the impact, if they had all those resources when they were 20, imagine what they would have done. So the one thing they have less of is energy. that doesn't seem to multiply like the other things do. But all other resources are there. And so for those who are saying, no, I really think I want to do something meaningful, we want to to come alongside them and say, yeah, let's help you determine what is meaningful. And there is a reason to keep building, and that's where that multiplication, that value multiplication comes in, is that it's a tool that as you have a stronger tool, you can do more with. So what are you trying to do? Is that something family related? Is that something ministry related or charitable? What is that? But let's get with you. I mean, we love that. So it's a little bit counter to our industry, because instead of encouraging people to put all their money with us, right, for the rest of their lives, which is good for our business in a sense, but we're saying, should you be investing into something with your family, whether it's in your current business or a new business idea with your adult child, as you help them learn that process, like, what do you want to do and how can we help you?
Well, I think you guys are one, it's a great insight, and I think it's one that I haven't heard it talked about ever. Outside of like philanthropic circles or something like become a SCORE counselor, right? Like
Right.
But I think not only is it a great message, but it's also one that, given your multi-generational infrastructure that you have, it's one where you're kind of poised to speak to the person who's trying to figure out what does Beyond the Summit mean.
Right.
And Nick, you're in a spot to talk to the next generation about what is their role in that. And I think maybe the biggest thing that, I'll say this just as a compliment, there's a lot of people in this area who've learned a lot from your family just by its example.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's inspirational. It's a great word to use. And I think it holds that same promise for the clients that you're working with, not in the terms of the size and the health of your family, but in bringing the same message with two different perspectives, where you can speak to one generation, you can speak to the other, and then vice versa. Because how powerful is it for an adult, retirement age, kind of some patriarch of the family,
Right.
to hear from the generation that they're trying to steward assets for, just how important purpose is.
Right.
I mean, nobody wants to work in a business where the business owner doesn't know what they're about, doesn't know what the future is. There's no vision.
Right.
I would imagine that there's some angst in families too,
Sure.
when that's not there. And sometimes they'll hear it from him in ways they won't hear it from you. So I
Right.
think you guys have a pretty neat competitive advantage in that arena. It's just an interesting
Yeah, it's
thought concept.
I think so too. It'll be interesting. We think we're excited about it, and
Yeah.
it's funny because I was sharing it with the client that we felt needed that, just the things that they were telling us, and I made the statement, I'm really excited about this, and Nicholas said, I'm excited about this too, right? Because I forget, because again, I'm thinking of it as starting something.
Right.
But he's thinking of it, no, I get it. I'm 100% on board, and it's a long road, but I get the value, and I'm 100% in. So it's been really neat to see that.
Well, it's funny. One of the things, we're the same age, and I have lucky to have a good chunk of our team that's 20 years younger than me.
Right.
And what I find now is that they get more excited about long range stuff than I do.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's kind of like, well, yeah, that's a great plan. I might not be able to see the end of that.
Right.
But I'm going to see it. I'm pretty excited about it, right?
Exactly.
And it's funny you say, like, you made a statement about one thing that generation that needs to be thinking beyond the summit, what they have less of is energy. And be like, well, I don't know, man. Go to a pickleball court or driving range.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That is a good point.
It's kind of like our approach in business. When we get involved with a business owner, one of the things that we talk about is, like, this is your church, right? Not like this is your place to minister to people.
Right.
Now,
right.
if you are a Christian, that has some very specific, intonations to it. But to minister to someone needs to attend to their needs, right? So look at it as customers come second, your employees come first. And this is a great place for them to learn what vision and values and professionalism and responsibility and opportunity look like inside a business, because they might not get that anywhere. They may not be darkening the doors of a church to see what healthy community looks like.
Right.
And as you were talking, I was thinking, you guys are in the exact same spot. Because nobody's carrying this message of Beyond the Summit to the people that need to hear it. There's no nonprofit. There's like, Journey of Generosity, but that's different. That's about philanthropy. That's not about the pursuit of something that has meaning and purpose and is building It's about investing in some. It's philanthropy is saying somebody else has a vision. They don't have the resources. I want to give them resources to
Right.
pursue that. What you guys are
Right.
talking about is no. You need to create a vision
Right.
for your
Mhm.
family and for the wealth that you've created, and then you need to bring the generations behind you along on that vision. And nobody's talking about that. And who better than the people whose office those pickleballers and golfers are driving to, you know,
Right.
when they have to have that afternoon meeting to talk about their portfolio.
Right.
They're going to hear it vocationally,
Right.
not avocational. They're going to hear it in the context of the work that they have to do. So I commend you in your work. I hope that this is a year where this message really gets some lift under it,
Yeah.
and we see. We'll have you back in a year and be like, so how'd it go? What did you
Right,
guys
right.
accomplish this year? Because
Yeah.
I think it's pretty exciting, and I was glad you guys agreed to come in and talk about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, thank you for letting us. We're excited about it too, and it's like I said, it's been something that's been building and being revealed to me, and it's exciting that we have a platform to share it because
Yeah.
we could share it within our family regardless. But
It's a
where
pretty
you,
big platform.
yeah, that's a big platform in and of itself.
It's true.
But it isn't with the business to be able to share it with hundreds of families is what really creates a lot of excitement as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we will put links in the show notes so that guys can find Irving Financial Group if they're interested in more of this message. They know who to call. And there'll be a leadership guide that's published as a part of the show notes in every episode where we'll kind of pull out, our team will go through this transcript and the recording, and they'll pull out some of the insights and give you some questions, some things to talk about with your team, talk about with your family, probably a better venue for this episode, or just sit with a pen and paper and get your thoughts clear on paper about how you can bring some of these principles about Beyond the Summit into your family in this next year. So until then, thanks, and we'll see you on the next episode.